Welcome to CommercialDrones.fm, the podcast that explores the commercial drone industry, the people who power it, and the concepts that drive it. I'm your host, Ian Smith. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the show. So today we've got James Harrison, who's the CEO and co-founder of Sky Futures, a UK company that's focused on bringing drone inspection technology to industry. So welcome to the show, James, and thank you so much for joining us from the UK.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So where are you located right now? What city are you in?
So we're based just outside of London, actually next to Heathrow Airport, so I can see the planes taking off and landing from the office window, which is pretty cool.
Okay, nice. So before we even get really into the meat of the podcast here, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your background and kind of, about yourself and how you discovered the drone industry, and then we'll kind of tie that in with, I'm really interested to hear how Sky Futures, the company, was created as well.
Sure. So we actually first encountered drones a very long time ago. I was actually, it seems like an eternity ago, but I was in the military. And back in 2006, 2007, I was serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was a time when kind of the best drones were all in the military. That was pretty much where you encountered them. And my role, I was a frontline platoon commander. So I would be on the ground, going forward either around Baghdad when I was in Iraq or in Helmand province in Afghanistan. And latterly in there, I had 130 Afghans under my command with kind of 5 Brits and 3 interpreters and typically someone called a forward air controller. And we would plan what we would do before we go out on missions. And some of them were involving us getting airdropped into places we'd never been before. So I was working with the 101st Airborne. So I worked very closely with the US, both in Iraq and in Afghanistan. And I was essentially a customer for drone data. So I would ask for the latest visuals on areas where we go into, and I'd ask if we'd have, maybe an image from the morning, from lunchtime, from the evening. And we just analyze those images, and we started to do different things. So we started to try and take reference measurements to see how wide roads were, or to try and work out how high buildings were based on kind of average tree height, or pretty unsophisticated things at the time. But it really just got us thinking. And my co-founders, Chris Blackford, he was also served in the military. He was a forward air controller, and so he was someone who would essentially translate my request for data, and then digest that, and then think, well, do I need to call in, a drone? Is it a helicopter? Is it a fixed wing? And he would get the appropriate data by kind of calling those things in. So that was kind of the very early background for me. And then I left the military and went to Deloitte to become a strategy consultant in London. But this idea was very much in our heads, and we kind of worked on it as essentially a side project before incorporating the business in 2009. So quite a while ago. But then there was another co-founder, Nick Rogers, who we started working with at this time, who's a captain for a British legacy airline. So very much knows about aviation and legislation regulations. And we teamed up with Nick, and that's kind of like the basis and for Sky Futures.
Yeah, it seems like a great foundation. At least on the podcast, I haven't had a guest from a company that really has had that much experience with drones prior to founding a company or starting it. But it's cool to see your perspective on finding the utility of them while kind of in theater, as it were. And so Sky Futures then, so it was founded in 2011. What is kind of like, what was the mission back then, and has it changed? I mean, tell us a little bit about the company and what its purpose is, and maybe you can share some of the clients that you have that are publicly known.
Sure. So we actually started earlier than that. We started in 2009. So it's a bit older than that, but we were working a lot, and I think any other business that was around looking at drones at that time had exactly the same issues, whereby actually getting your hands on good hardware that wasn't military was quite difficult. So I think we pretty much all went down the same route of trying to get drones from different places, but we didn't find them that reliable. So we really kind of started working it up much earlier. But really, it was kind of from January 2011 that we kind of started operating. I guess the way we think about ourselves today is as a technology company, but we had to come a fair way to get there. So back in 2011, we wanted to manage the data and enable people to get better information from the data set rather than just looking at images. And so that was really what we wanted to do. But when we went up to Aberdeen and talked to people like BP and Shell, and we said, guys, why don't you buy a drone and we'll manage this data for you? Their kind of first reaction back then was, what is a drone? How do I use it? What are the regulations? And they just went, guys, can't you just provide a service? That was really kind of the very beginning, which was kind of a little disheartening because that kind of wasn't what we set out to do. We want to be really at the front working with the data. So we started by saying, okay, you know what, we'll do that. So obviously we weren't from an oil and gas background. So we teamed up and hired in experts. So obviously people from the oil and gas industry. So we had a flare expert, who's got kind of 35 years experience. We hired in people who were kind of inspection engineer experts and had written the inspection scopes for these large oil companies to come on board, so we could understand what we needed to do to deliver and then to provide a service. So I guess that's how we started out. But we always had this vision of we wanted to manage the data and be more than that. So by providing the service, we really got to understand what it is that actually is in the sort of inspection process. So you collect data, you create a report, you hand it to a client, and more importantly, we kind of figured what are the most expensive constituent parts of that process. And it's not the data collection. It's not someone with a drone flying around and doing the inspection. It's actually someone analyzing all of that data. It takes ages. So if you're offshore or onshore, whatever, getting data for 5 days, you can expect you're probably doing 2 weeks worth of inspection reporting, to turn that data into something useful, which is ultimately what you get paid for. So we really focused in on thinking, how can we get to automate that process in the future, which is a big vision, but so we took baby steps, and that's kind of what drove us to start building out the kind of, I guess, the enterprise solutions you see today, which is our kind of software suite and training, which is kind of part of that.
Yeah. And today, and this question comes from one of the podcast supporters, today, do you guys, through that transition all the way back in 2009, 2011, and all the way here to the middle of 2017, do you guys see yourselves right now more as an asset management platform or as a data analysis provider?
That's a really good question. So we enable enterprise customers, either asset owners and operators or other service companies, kind of large engineering firms, to go and conduct an inspection and to then use our platform to quickly do analysis on that data, share and derive information from it. The reason I kind of laughed a little bit on that is because we have customers for our software who don't even use drones because it's just very good enterprise inspection software. The workflows are really good. It's all completely aligned to what the customers need because that's obviously where it came from. And we had a massive advantage in that we weren't working with legacy software or trying to retrofit something in. We took it from scratch, and it's not kind of heavy engineering design led. It's kind of, we took a very agile approach. It's very nice. It's clean. It's simple to use.
Yeah, I've seen your software in person, and I have to agree, it's quite nice and very, very specific and targeted at the industries that you guys target. So recently, so you guys don't just do software and kind of like these types of managed services and other things, but you also do, I believe, you have your own kind of drone training academy, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Plus, I believe there was some pretty big news to come out of the academy recently regarding regulations for drones in the UK.
So we started off with the managed services, and now we also train enterprise. So if you're a large company, like the public limited companies, people like Costain or James Fisher, we train these massive engineering companies so they can use drones professionally, and then we paired with our software package, Flight Deck, which is the fleet and flight management tool, which kind of does the compliance, which means they're operating to very high standards. They can go out and use it. So that's how it came out. And we've got another center in Houston, so another training center there, which is very similar. And these things aren't easy to find, obviously, with these kind of big structures and everything else. So that's also got a really good course, and you do a Part 107 online package, obviously, because it's in the US. And we'll be rolling out more training centers globally soon, which is awesome. So they're really good. And we're really privileged recently to have the Minister for Aviation, Lord Callanan, when they decided to launch the new drone regulations in the UK, they chose to come to Sky Futures Training Academy to do that launch. So we obviously do work with government very closely on regulations and legislation, not just in the UK but elsewhere. And it was just really great to have him down to kind of do his live piece to camera on Sky News at the training centre.
So what was the announcement? It was, is it for registration of drones, or was it something else in the UK?
It's actually, so there was a really wide consultation, and a wide consultation in our view is excellent because it really takes in everyone's views into account. So everyone from BALPA, the British Airline Pilots Association, all the way through to the model aircraft people who have been flying for years and years and years and have got loads of experience, to the new kind of professional operators and kind of new people who are interested in drones. So they did a big big survey, and what came back was their kind of response to it was that they want to put in a basic test, probably through an app that enables everyone who buys a drone to be able to fly safely. So it's a small piece of compliance to ensure that you know what you're doing, because I think the biggest issue we have in the commercial drone space is kind of some of these negative stories around, or someone flying at 1,000 foot high, in a restricted area, which is obviously not great and it's dangerous. So, we think, provided it is light touch and it's not a big burden, because obviously people just won't do it if it's too burdensome. But if it is a simple case of, get on that, do some kind of general knowledge questions and pass it, we think that, that could be a really excellent way of separating hobbyists from enterprise users, from professional users of drones.
Yeah.
And keep everyone safe. So, so we think that's, provided we need to see the details, but so far we think it's really good. And I think, one of the points that I did make to the minister, and that we make kind of generally whenever we can, is that there is a lot of people talking about, there was a drone near an aircraft, or, the pilot saw it at 20,000 foot. I'm afraid a lot of this is nonsense. And I think people need to know that. So we flew we did some interoperability testing in Galeano in Louisiana. So we flew a drone. We started it on the ground, and it was equipped with ADS-B in and out. And we had an S-92 helicopter at 500 foot. And we raised the drone 100 foot, in 100 foot increments, all the way to 400 foot with a 70 meter lateral separation from the S-92. The pilot could see on his iPad the exact location of the drone, as could the other crew members, and they were looking for the drone. They could not see the actual drone with their eyes when it was at 400 foot, so just 100 foot below them, and 70 meters lateral separation. They couldn't see it, and the drone is zoomed straight in on them, and you can see they're looking exactly at where it is, but they can't. They said not once did we actually physically see it.
Oh wow!
So I think when we hear about people reporting, I saw a drone here, I saw a drone there, I think you've got to take it with a pinch of salt, and it's really frustrating that we're getting this. But I think there are some counter drone technology out there that people will start to use, and I think that will settle some of those kind of initial fears. But I think it's really important to know that we've tested it. We've had pilots looking out the cockpit for it, and they couldn't see it. So I think people need to bear that in mind before they kind of run with too many scare stories on that.
Yeah, I totally agree. So we had talked kind of, you guys have
a little bit of an announcement that just came out, and can you tell us a little bit more about that, how it relates to Sky Futures business and kind of like the future of Sky Futures, related to this press release?
Sure. So I think, we've got 7+ years of operational experience delivering, in inspections in some of the hardest environments. So everything from, offshore on an oil and gas rig to on engineering sites, inspecting bridges and telecom masts and everything like this. So typically all the work we do is on industrial vertical infrastructure because the problem set and the workflow is very similar. The only caveat is construction is totally different. So we don't service that vertical. But if you think about everything else that is industrial vertical infrastructure, typically, that's something that we're really good at. So rather than, we don't see ourselves as kind of an inspection business, but we recognize that there is a large need for people to go out, collect the data and be really good at doing this and, and adding it to their kind of capability of other services they offer as a services business. So we launched the first of our international franchise program franchisees. It was launched in Malaysia, so that's Sky Futures Malaysia. That's based and headquartered in KL, and that was launched by the Petronas president and group CEO. So that's the national oil company, which is awesome. So that for us is really cool. So that was the kind of the big announcement. We've now got this international franchise program. Where people can obviously inquire, and we're looking for people, established businesses really that want to add the capability that want to be a Sky Futures, franchisee that can service clients locally. And I think, particularly our background and experience, and this actually harks back to working with indigenous troops particularly in Afghanistan, is local knowledge is key. And actually, we don't believe that by sitting in London and flying teams all around the world to do inspection jobs and then repatriating essentially all of the costs for the project and all of the skills and experience back to London is a viable thing for the long term. People would want to do this locally. So what we want to do is to enable, entrepreneurial forward-looking businesses that are, local, that have a good reputation to enhance themselves with this capability and to take it forward. And I think it's a really clear way of us both kind of winning and pushing the Sky Futures brand in the market.
That's awesome. Congratulations on that. That sounds really cool. And I totally agree with your thoughts on that and the strategy with kind of helping expand and bring these tools that you guys have been developing to enable other businesses to help out, those clients with drones. And now, a quick word from our sponsors. Commercial Drones FM is supported by Deveron UAS. Deveron UAS is building a standardized drone network for farmers all across North America, offering on-demand, near real-time field-level data when you want it. To learn more about how you can achieve scalable data collection in agriculture, visit DeveronUAS.com. That's DeveronUAS.com. Okay, back to the show. You mentioned some of the other industries. So you guys, as far as I know, started with a focus on oil and gas, but what are the other industries, if you could kind of list some of the main ones that you focused on, forgetting about construction?
Yeah. So it's I kind of obvious one is kind of utilities and renewables, are two big industries for us. The only exception to the kind of typical industries we serve is solar. So solar farms are not vertical infrastructure, but we have a team here. We have image analysis specialists. They're PhDs in this area, and actually the algos that we have that can detect corrosion and problem sets on vertical infrastructure can be tailored towards horizontal solutions. So one of the things we do is we had some inquiries from some solar farms, and they're saying, look, can we just send you some data and see what you can do with it? And we said, sure. So, in the first instance, we had about 650 images, and we meshed the metadata with the actual thermal image, and we're able to run the algo over it. And about 6.5 seconds later, we found all the problem sets, and you can kind of toggle by heat sensitivity, because if you're in Africa, or say you're in Morocco, it's going to be a lot of a differential compared to if you're in Scotland, right? So, the differential in heat is going to be different. But yeah, after 6.5, 7 seconds, it had located all the faults and geolocated it onto a map. So that was the inspection report. So the engineer can then log in and go, bang, I know exactly where to go, what to fix. So so that's pretty cool. So that's like the only exception, I guess, to the kind of vertical infrastructure at the moment.
So you guys work with a ton of very large clients. So what can you tell us about your customers' expectations for downstream data integration capabilities into their ERPs, which is their enterprise resource planning software, and their CRMs, their customer relationship management software? I mean, this has got to be a pretty big challenge. And of course, this question does come to us from one of the podcast supporters. So let us know a little bit about that, James.
Yeah, sure. So that's a really good question. So one of the things we did when we founded the business is we recognized that, if we want to be serious about working with industrial data sets that could be sensitive, often are, highly proprietary, that people don't want to get somewhere else, we needed to hire someone who knew what they're doing. So part of the founding team, we hired a really experienced CTO. It was interesting because we, at the time, and this was just before we kind of raised our first Series A, there was a kind of lot of resistance to the approach we took. So we could have gone and hired a PhD out of MIT or something like that, and to have the kind of latest view of someone who's just done a PhD and have them kind of run the technical part of the business. But in our world, that's kind of not really what we wanted. We needed someone who understood B2B, deeply, and had been in that kind of in that kind of area their whole life. So Adrian, our CTO, has kind of got 30 years experience. He's done everything from build servers in the desert to putting in a telco network in the South Pacific. So and has worked with large organizations and lots of startups and internet startups as well. So we took the approach that we wanted to get someone on board who deeply understood this, because it's clearly not my skill set, right? And it's not Chris's and it's not Nick's. So Adrian brings that to bear. So when we're looking at how we manage the data securely, how we scale that in the cloud, so we are kind of cloud first. We run it on AWS. We also run additional security over the top, and we can run local instances so it doesn't have to leave country. So that's something we really deeply understand. And when you're talking about integration with kind of ERP systems and stuff like that, we have RESTful APIs. We can integrate with industry, industry leading asset management systems, so IBM's Maximo or SAP or some of the more niche ones. That's no problem at all. So we really thought a lot about that in terms of how we're going to build the product and how we're going to scale that. So before we even cut a line of code, we really worked hard on understanding what it was that needed to be put in place. So we've got a really good handle on that.
Let's talk about now the future of Sky Futures, if you can say that. So with the franchise model, I was going to ask about the type of hardware you guys use, but when expanding your business and franchising with this model, it doesn't really matter actually about the hardware you use. It's all just about the deliverables, delivering straight to the client exactly what they want. But what kind of hardware have you guys used historically for some of your jobs? And did it ever include long-range fixed-wing drones? Or is this more specifically multi-rotor or VTOL platforms that are tailored for the vertical infrastructure, which you guys are focused on?
Yeah, so the drones that we've typically used, I mean, we've been using what was Ascending, now Intel drones. I think that's pretty much, if you're working in industrial inspection, that's been the workhorse since the get-go. The team at Ascending really did very well early on and continue to update and push the boundaries of that. And obviously now, as part of Intel with Anil and his team, I think it's they're doing great things, and it's really interesting to see how see the innovations coming out of there, and they've done some really good proof points recently. So that's kind of been the workhorse, for difficult or kind of industrial inspection. And I think it is really important that that we still have a connection to the hardware, because we need to ensure that the franchises are using, not only the best drones, but then that's aligned to the operations manual and the SMS and all these things that's a safety management system, all these things that get continually updated. I mean, these are live documents. And so we're always testing and looking at new hardware. So, the drone that we use for internal inspection. So we did the world's first kind of completely unmanned inspection in a confined space on a floating production vessel for BW offshore. So we did that kind of last summer, which is amazing, right? Because if you put people in confined spaces, it's incredibly dangerous. People do die in that environment, sadly, every year. So whatever we can do to reduce that risk, it should be the industry standard, and it's called a LARP. As low as possible in terms of the safety risk, right? And so by using a drone inside of a confined space, that's really gets you there. So the Flyability Ilios is the drone we use for confined spaces. Now they kind of span out of uni, and when we saw that pretty early. I mean, my CTO, I remember coming to me really early, going, "I love this." We actually had a look at it, and the first prototypes were, as you expect, they were prototypes. So we worked very closely with the team there, and we used it at our training center where we have really good confined spaces which are horrible and dark and dirty, and work with that team to get that drone up to a level where we were confident that we could then use it industrially. And actually now it's being well received, and lots of people are using it in industrial settings, which is excellent, because I think some of what we do is to drive the entire industry forward, because that's really important. So we use the kind of Flyability Ilios as well, but that took about 18 months, I think, from kind of start to finish. And then currently for training, when we do the basic part of the training, and for the emergency services, we train on DJI Inspires. They are what the emergency services use on a day-to-day basis at the moment. And I know that some of them are looking at upgrading to the M200, and there's a few other options out there that are being used. Aerotronics, I know, have got some first responders using it, as have Aerion. So, I mean, we're not, I guess we're drone agnostic, but we will only work with and train on, things that are absolutely suited, and we have to make sure that we've tested them robustly first. I think that's really important, because the safety element is why you use drones in the first place.
And have you guys used any fixed wing hardware in the past for any of these missions?
Yeah, so right at the very beginning, we did. That was back in kind of 2011. But we kind of realized that actually we took a view, what's the industry going to look like in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time? We took a view that fixed wing is all about, how fast you can process that data, and Pix4D have really shown how it's done. They've done an excellent job of kind of putting that together. Not on the operational side, but in terms of the processing. And we figured that that's really, it's far more automated. You're using it in areas where it isn't so difficult. So if you're on a farm in the middle of nowhere, or whatever, there aren't that many hazards. So actually, it's a lot easier to get the permissions and to do it. So we figured the barriers to entry are a bit lower for that. So we actually deliberately didn't work ourselves with that. Although we do, through the Expanse inspection platform, we do take in fixed wing data. So we work with partners where clients request, some fixed wing data or some satellite data. We pull that through the platform so the clients can access whatever they want. So, we work with kind of leading industry providers of fixed wing solutions, both BVLOS plus some kind of normal kind of smaller kind of BVLOS operations as well.
Looking all the way back to 2009 or 2011, what was one of the most difficult moments you felt you had to overcome? I mean, I entered the drone industry late 2012, early 2013. So my idea of the beginnings of the start of this technology in the industry were really influenced by you guys. So what were some of the big learnings you guys had early on? I mean, maybe you could share that with us so you can paint the picture of how far we've come or how far we have to go.
So if I was going to share all my learnings, I think we'd be here for far too long. But fortunately, I've only learned them once. I think the biggest learning that we had at the very beginning, and we had this really early, and I'm so pleased we did, because I still see people make this mistake. And it's the one bit of advice I give to everyone, which is if you're going, you can't just fly a drone. That you need to understand an industry, and it's much better, being a solar farm inspector and then getting into drones for solar farms than going, I know I'm going to be a drone inspector and picking an industry. You must have the industry knowledge, or you cannot bring value. You cannot add value. You're just making bigger problems by producing more data and handing it over. I think that is the single biggest thing. Get deep in a vertical. Don't do everything. Get super deep. Get really in with your clients. Understand what it is that they need to do. If you're in, real estate, really focus on what value you can add as opposed to everyone else. You can just fly a drone and take some nice images. Can you combine it with some internal, 3D models? Can you make it interactive? Can you host it differently? Can you really give them a wow to their client that makes you indispensable? And I think that's really the biggest learning for anyone kind of thinking of that. And I'm so pleased that we did that early. And that was when, I think when we kind of looked at the fixed wing drones and thought, well, if we can fly and create a digital elevation map, so can everyone else, right? What makes us better or different? So, and we explore getting in a GIS specialist. But then I thought, we thought, do you know what? We need to really stick to the vertical infrastructure. And rightly, as you said, at the very beginning, it was oil and gas. But now it's really, we're solving the same problem sets, and we're working with industries with the same workflow, right? So if you've got a bridge, for example, the Forth Road Bridge that kind of which kind of enables you to get across Scotland rather than taking like a 5-hour detour. About 2 years ago, over the winter, that they discovered some massive cracks in it and had to shut the bridge. This was like a really big problem, and the Scottish Parliament were getting very exercised about it, and so we worked for the engineering firm for Amy, and we flew there for 3 weeks solid, and they managed to get the bridge kind of fixed and back on track 12 days ahead of schedule, which was excellent. But we were a massive contributor to that because we provided things that they couldn't get. But for us, it was completely natural. It was metallic structure over water. That's what we've been doing for years, right? So for us, it was completely straightforward. And I think it was, by leveraging that knowledge and actually getting pulled into different industries, that's kind of the key learning for us. And actually now, I'd say kind of 90% of our work comes from referrals, from people, and particularly engineering firms, just going, you got to go, and these guys have got a major problem. Can you go and have a chat to this guy? And they pass us on. So, and that's based off just knowing really knowing what we can do and how we can solve the problem for them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that sentiment. I mean, you see it a lot sometimes almost at the opposite end of the spectrum with drones in agriculture. If you're not prepared to basically become a farmer and understand the business, understand what it means to grow and have that in your family for generations, then it's really difficult to actually provide something of value to the client with drones. So yeah, it goes across the full end of the spectrum. Good stuff.
And we get hit up a lot by people kind of wanting to learn and wanting to get into the industry. And I try and answer as many people as I can. And this is kind of by way of like a bit of a public apology for people I haven't been able to get around to, because we do get a fair lot of inbound. As you can imagine, being quite early, you just get so many things. But that is something I always try and share. And for example, I've got an someone who was in the military. In the UK military, he's a Kiwi. He's gone back to New Zealand. He's been out about 5 years, and he's just reached out to me for some help and advice. And of course, the first thing is I said, yes, of course I will, and I'll try and help them as much as I can. And I think that's something that we always try and do. We do try and kind of pay it forward. We were lucky to get in this industry really early, and to have that kind of period to learn. Whereas now, I guess if you're starting out, you need to learn a bit faster because there's so many companies trying to get on and do things. But we really try and help where we can and trying to kind of help the wider community. And I guess some of the work that we've done previously, and I put it on a LinkedIn post, was about standards and how we're trying to work with industry to set standards. So if someone wants to utilize drones in the maritime environment, for example, there is now a recognized standard by the American Bureau of Shipping, by ABS, that we worked really hard with them on in Houston and out of Singapore as well, to try and set this standard so it's now clear, and you can go to ABS if you want to do maritime inspection using drones and look it up and understand what you need to deliver to what standard in order to be able to do it. So I think that's another piece of work that we've been doing to try and, I guess, push the whole industry forward to raise the bar, not to make it anti-competitive, but to ensure that people who want to use drones professionally have clear guidance and understanding on what they need to do. So hopefully that's gone by way of kind of helping kind of new people and existing drone operators understand if they want to break into a different market, this is kind of what is expected. And we've done that with kind of like the oil and gas standards, and we're taking that, we're pushing that pretty hard in Malaysia as well. And there's a few countries around the world where if you want to go operate, you'll notice that they're quite similar. That may be because we kind of work with the aviation authorities in those countries to kind of set the standards in the first place to put something in place, because they had no understanding of what how to regulate us or how to enable safe operations.
Well, keep up the good work there, James, and the rest of the crew over at Sky Futures. Folks, you can follow James Harrison on Twitter at jharrisonsf, and you can also follow Sky Futures on Twitter at Sky-Futures. And you can also check out their website with their blog and other content like their software and their clients at sky-futures.com. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your podcast player of choice in order to get the latest episodes as soon as they're released. You can also check out the podcast website at commercialdrones.fm and read up on past episodes and get the latest free drone industry review quarterly ebook. So James, any last thoughts before we cut off the mics?
Yeah, I think you talk about the industry moving fast, and that's exactly what's happening. I think the last thought for me is that AI will be huge in this industry. The industrial Internet of Things is talked about a lot, but drones are collecting data from unique angles and perspectives that hasn't been got before. Plus, they collect other things like metadata, so the position of the cameras, the GPS coordinates of the drone, and I think that's going to be a huge enabler in the future. So I think the big last thought from us is that predictive analytics and AI in drones is going to be huge, and hopefully we'll be one of the pioneers in that too.
Beautiful last thoughts. Well, thank you so much, James. That's James Harrison, co-founder and CEO of Sky Futures. Everybody, thank you so much for listening, and have a very happy Thanksgiving. Cheers.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, everyone. Bye.